good. All right. And then, yeah, so then when we get ready to talk about the personal Kanban stuff, I'll just share one of my other screens and we'll be ready to go.
Okay, well, let me introduce us briefly. My name's Oliver Berkman. I'm an author and a journalist based here in Brooklyn. You're Jim Benson. You're an organizational consultant based in Seattle. Right. And among other things, you're the creator of this approach to managing work and workflow called the personal Kanban, which is a personalized adaptation of a Japanese corporate management approach, I think, in some ways that people, right, that people may have heard of. You have a book called Personal Kanban and other resources which we can point people to in the notes for this conversation. I just thought it would be really useful and interesting to have a conversation about time management in a time of apocalypse. Partly I've been wanting to talk to you about this anyway for a while, just because it's made such a big difference to me and how I manage my work and my time in the last couple of years. Because it feels to me like a rare approach that really takes seriously the fact that we are finite human beings with finite time. And yet we live in this world of infinite inputs, so that you really have to have some kind of system for making tough choices about what you're going to do. Otherwise you just sort of drive yourself crazy and never finish anything. But it feels particularly relevant now, and the reason that I mentioned it in a piece I wrote for The Guardian just the other day, or linked to it from there, I feel like it could be very, very useful in certain ways for people navigating a new relationship to time in the present situation of the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, everyone is doing something different with regard to their time now. So some people have far less of it. Here we've got a small child and 2 jobs, and that doesn't really work mathematically in terms of time. Other people find themselves, I think, with far more time than they had, and almost a confusion about which things to do with it. And then, of course, in the worst cases, there are people who have far too much time because they've already lost their work as a result of what's going on. So this, I think, is probably a very useful way to get a handle on relating to time in a new way. But also, I have found anyway that it's really useful just in the context of this kind of background crackle of anxiety and uncertainty that seems to, that is obviously here for all of us, sometimes to do with specific worries about health or the health of friends and relations, but even just the kind of, just that kind of ambient sense of being on edge that is so distracting when you're trying to sort of focus and do some of the things that still need doing, even though so much has stopped. So that's really where I'm coming from on this.
Okay.
I wondered if you could first of all just briefly say something about how you got to be here, how you got to be interested in the sort of flow of work through people's lives and the personal Kanban. And then if you can just give us a very brief kind of quick start guide for anyone who's never heard of it, about how this particular approach works, then I guess we could discuss a little bit more why it seems to be why it might be particularly useful at the moment. Does that sound right?
That sounds perfect.
Great.
So yeah, how I got here, no one starts out wanting to do what I'm doing now. When you're a kid, you're like, it's just not something. It's not a profession that has a name really. So I started off in psychology and urban planning. My degrees are in urban planning, and I used to build freeways and subway systems and large multi-billion-dollar mega projects. And when we did that, we managed hundreds or thousands of people spread across many companies and agencies. And we did that before there was an internet. So we did it with fax machines and telephones and driving.
Wow.
And so I became very used to that kind of distributed working environment. And then in 2000, I started a software company. And every day in the software world, people tend to start the day by having what they call a stand-up meeting. In that stand-up meeting, they ask 3 questions, which were, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And are you blocked? Do you need any help? And people would always answer those questions. And one day, I had the audacity to ask the question, you know the thing you said you're doing yesterday? Did you finish it? And the guy's like, well, no, because of this, that, and the other thing. And I was like, well, how about the thing you started the day before? Well, no, because of this, that, and the other thing. It's like, well, how about the day before? And like, shut up. And we asked everybody. It turned out that everybody had, you know, maybe 5 to 15 things in progress. So we listed down everything everybody was doing, and we found out that, that as a total of like 9 people or something, we had over 150 things in flight. And so I'm like, maybe this is where our stress is coming from. So we listed everything down, we put it on a whiteboard, and we said, okay, from now on, each of us, you know, we're only going to do 3 things at a time, 3 or less. And so just let me share my screen really quickly, and I can actually show how this works. This is really simple, but it ends up, as you've noted, being pretty powerful. So sharing the screen. So in any working situation, we have 3 states: stuff we haven't done yet, stuff that we're actively doing, and stuff that's completed. In Lean, this is called a value stream. And often between the beginning and the end, there are many steps. So this could be coding, testing, integration, release could all be columns, or it could be first draft, second draft, third draft, complete, or you know, whatever the things are, the stages that your things go through in order to get done. So lots of times for a lot of teams, it could be Jim, Tony, Ann, Dave, John, you know, so what the people are actually doing. So first thing we do is, like right now, before any of this is going on, this is kind of like how we organize all of our work. It's jammed in our heads and we can't see it. So just imagine you can't even see it, and you have to like go in your head and kind of pull out what to do next. And that ends up, there's too many variables there. It's too difficult to figure out what's going on. So we want to do instead say, all right, well, we're not going to play that game. We're going to write down everything that we need to do on Post-it notes, and we are going to put it in our options column. And then that big mass of stuff ends up becoming a rectangle, or in this case, square. Oh no, it's
for one moment. This looks a lot like the system I've made for myself, but these are all these particular notes all have questions on them. This could just
So this is actually a Kanban that I used in one of our online classes,
right,
to drive the discussion or the topics that I was talking about at each time. So I would go through and I would, you know, say, okay, well, you know, first thing we want to do when we're doing our work is we want to figure out, you know, what's actually going on. Who am I working with? How are we working? Are we ahead or behind? Why do people keep bringing up these same problems over and over again? And these are like basic questions that any team would need to answer.
But this could just as easily be tasks that are on your to-do list, right? This could just as easily be.
This could easily be, you know, wash the cat, disassemble the car,
Right.
sell the house, flee to an offshore island, and learn to bake bread.
Right.
You know, so any tasks that they are, these happen to be my tasks, which were in the form of questions.
Right. Got it.
So then here, we'll just go ahead and make this explicit. We have a work in process limit. So the 2 things are to visualize our work, which we already have. These are the 2 rules: visualize your work, and then limit your work in progress. So let's just say that these are tasky tasks, and we would pull 3 of those in doing. We would do them until 1 is done, focus and finish. And then we actually see that we have capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And we bring the next thing in, focus on stuff, finish, bring something in. And now what happens is when this capacity opens up, we can look and be we can scrutinize what we're pulling in next at a much higher level, because now this is 1/3 of everything we could be doing.
Mhm.
Whereas before, our doing column literally just looked like this. You
Yeah.
know, just all the stuff was in it. So this is the way it was for my developers, where you just had tons and tons of stuff. And then after a while, you're like, just looking at that makes me sick to my stomach. So this is a much more acceptable level of active work. You focus on something, you finish it with quality because you're paying attention, you're not distracted, and you move on. There's a lot of psychology behind that about why it works. There's a lot of names for each of these relationships. Those resources are online, but for the purpose of the nickel tour, that would be the nickel tour.
And it's great. It's very tempting, I think, when as a response to that to say, well, I can't afford to just put 3 items into
Yeah.
the work in progress column. There are more things that I have to be working on right now. And that was my sort of initial reaction to hearing about this stuff. It's like, it sounds great in theory, but and actually getting to the point where you realize that what's the sort of the problem with that response, which I guess is that you always are working with limited capacity, whether you kid yourself that you're working on 100 things at once or not. Say a little bit more about that, because I think that is actually one of the most powerful parts of this for me.
So I have not become superhuman, and from time to time I am doing 4 or 5 things at once. That's life. But if you don't limit your work in progress, or you don't set a limit on it, then you're going to end up like my developers. You're going to have 15 things in flight at once. And then what happens when you do that is you only have so much capacity in your head, and you will start to forget things that you've already done. So you'll go back to one of those things and you'll pick it up to do it again. You're like, now where was I? And then you'll take 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours just to figure out where you were.
Right.
So there are huge penalties for having too many tasks in flight that we just don't take for granted. So it's like, maybe you don't bother to do that, and then you just do a crappy job. You give it to somebody else, and then they're like, this is crap. And then they give it back to you, and then you do it again. And you're like, oh, more work. It's like, no, it's not more work. It's the same work. You didn't finish it the first time because you didn't focus on it. So yes, your work is going to fluctuate, but if you don't pay attention to it, it will mistreat you every time.
I did a little, I made a version of the one that I use here, which I'll just hold up to the camera just to make the point that, of course, you can do this in, and perhaps more archetypally, it is done in hard copy, on a piece of paper.
Yes. This right here. This is part of my Kanban.
This is part of your work. Okay.
Yeah, my Kanban goes from keyboard to desk to other part of desk.
Nice. I am just blatantly working on your instructions here, but I've got this file folder here with these 4 columns, and the idea being, that you just select the ones you're going to work on, and then they get moved through to done. I've got this one other column here which you write about, which which is that there are things you're going to work on where you get as far as you can with it until somebody gets back to you on it, basically. And that is something that you can't just let that jam up this system, because then you're just sitting around waiting for someone to return your call.
Yeah. So the idea is we would like to complete things, and then when they're done, we would like to feel good about them and get on with our lives. So what we don't want is a whole lot of things jamming up the column that are stuck in flight. We want to use that column also as a learning opportunity to say, wow, I keep starting these tasks, and then they get stuck in waiting because I'm waiting for this person. Maybe I should figure out if that person is available before I start one of those tasks. A waiting column or a pen column is incredibly important, and we use those all the time. We also use different columns for finding better ways to prioritize our work or to learn from our work after it's been completed.
Right, and you can just invent as many. You're giving us the basics here, but you can just invent as many columns as seems useful for your particular situation.
So that thing I was just showing. Let me just let me just give a quick bounce around of some other things. I'll just share the screen again and share. And so in this system, I've been using this kind of doodle program to teach these classes.
Mhm.
And in these classes, there have been a lot of different ways to make a board so that you are, you know, either you're trying to prevent firefighting, or you're trying, you know, to say, here are my options by how complex they are, or by what project they go in, or my done column, which is like, did I enjoy the task? Did I not enjoy the task, or so forth. The goal here is to visualize the work. That's it.
Right.
And you can get as creative or as detailed as you want, depending on the situation that you're in. It helps to start with one like you just showed, or like I started with there,
Yeah.
because you want to start with the simplest system possible and then add to it as you find that you need more information.
Right. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to stop and think a bit about why this is, you know, not just a kind of slightly geeky management system. There's definitely, I know you are doing a lot of this inside organizations, but I think the principles here are very useful for people managing, you know, household stuff and trying to homeschool their kids at the moment.
Exactly.
And all sorts of other stuff.
So we've worked with this with educators, with parents, with educational psychologists. So, you know, helping kids with different learning styles or other challenges, be able to see the expectations that are before them and to understand the immediate rewards of doing something that builds over time. So one of the groups that we worked with was runaway drug addicted teenagers. There's probably no other group on earth that has more of a short-term gain window than that group. They have to figure out like where they're going to sleep, how they're going to eat, how they're going to stay clean, hopefully, et cetera. And so we built a system with the group that was working with them that would show them that when they did a particular thing, it was part of a larger body of work, that each ticket that they moved had a reward attached to it, sometimes just finishing it, sometimes something greater. And then they were able to say, okay, I now see that I've, you know, if you just gave them a report and said, hey, you're 10% done, they'd be like, wow, I so don't care. but if you show them like a body of stuff and you see that you've actually moved 10% of it already, then they're like, oh wait, I can do this. I see the pattern, I see the flow. So the reason that there's only 2 rules for personal Kanban is because the system is as flexible as it possibly can be. See what you're doing, don't do too much stuff. After that, you add your own rules depending on what you need at that time.
I think that part of the reason this seems so appropriate when everything is so uncertain is that this may not be a universal response to uncertainty and anxiety, but certainly I think it's pretty prevalent that you want to, there's a strong desire to sort of scramble back into a position of feeling in control when you feel out of control as a result of world events and everything else. And, you know, sometimes that may be specifically to do with staying healthy and germ-free in this situation, but it also manifests as like deciding that you've got to be like the perfect homeschooler of your children, or you've got to manage to somehow do a full day's work and a full day's parenting in a single day, and other things like things that are not actually possible and sort of logical grounds, and therefore are extremely just make the anxiety worse.
And right now, people are working in teams, working at home. They're dealing with working at home with people that they generally don't work with, generally don't work with their kids or their spouse. And then all of the people that they work with are in the same situation. And those families are having their own individual experiences. And there's no central place of kind of predictability.
And I think that one way a lot of people respond to that kind of feeling is by kind of trying to start in on 100 different tasks and projects and trying to sort of feel like you're the air traffic controller, you have everything, you have, or, that's on your.
There's a good story here, I think. So at one point there was a woman who was working with us whose father passed away, and she was in a world of hurt from that. And so we were working, we all had our Kanban, our personal Kanbans, or and our team one, and we reduced her WIP limit to one. And not just one thing at a time, but one thing a day.
WIP is work in progress.
Yeah, yes. So we said, you can do one thing a day and then you're done. Come in, do something so you have kind of routine and normalcy, and then go deal with what you need to deal with. And so one of the bigger problems right now is that everybody's left the office and they're still trying to pretend like they're still at the office,
right?
And they're not. So everyone that you're working with has something at home that they have to deal with. They're stressed out. We don't know when this is going to end. We don't know what the long-term impacts of it are going to be. And these things are existentially terrifying. Even if you're the most perfect homeschooler, pulling your kids out of school and not knowing when they're going to go back is inherently stressful.
Mm-hmm.
Kids now are incredibly social beings, and they've all got lots of stuff to do. So now all of a sudden there's no sports, there's no activities, there's none of these things. And that was kind of their rock, right? So whenever we go in and work with any group, whether it's in, groups of patients in hospitals or in a company or in a home setting or whatever, there's usually some unknowns that you want to calm. So one of the first things of getting all of your demands out of your head and up on a board is that all of those demands stop having unknowns and they get put in a very physical, tangible, knowable environment. Just doing that is calming. Now, it might show you a whole lot of things to do, which in and of itself might be a little bit stressful. But if you don't do that, you will tend to withdraw and do even less than you would have otherwise, which just increases your stress even more. The other thing that you can do is you can start to divide those things up. So I had the one backlog there, or the one options column with the quads that said Project A, Project B, Project C, Project D. People could do that now for things like stuff from work, stuff with kids, stuff for house, stuff for sanity. And then make sure every day that you move a couple of tickets from each of those blocks so that you maintain some balance and no one feels neglected, including yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think this is related to what you're saying, but one of the things I find so sort of eye-opening is that when you're moving one of those tickets from ready, waiting to be done, to being done, it's an opportunity to actually figure out what the actual thing is that you need to do, right? I mean, otherwise my to-do list has a tendency to, so if I've got something here on this one that says like chapter 12 question mark relating to a issue I have to figure out in the book I'm writing, right? That's not a doable task. And so once I move that to the doing column, that's an opportunity to actually have to figure out, what is something I can do in order to get that done. I find something, again, it is existential. There is something very, very calming about transitioning from that kind of vague alarm, usually with 3 question marks at the end of the ticket, to something. Well,
in the book, we actually call that existential overhead.
Oh, right.
Yep. So in the alarm that you have, that alarm actually is stuff that you think about. So, when Patty lost her dad, there was a great deal of existential overhead that went along with that. And we had to treat that as work in progress that we couldn't necessarily calm with work. We could only calm it by increasing her capacity to process. And many of us have been in that situation, and have been in that situation around people who don't get that. And in fact, we might not even get that.
Yeah.
So right now, I would think that almost everybody, all teams, should take what they normally do, divide that by 2, and consider that to be about the acceptable amount of work that you could do right now. Especially
Right.
considering that most teams are ridiculously overloaded anyway.
Right. So they're probably and another way, I guess it's just other ways of getting into the same idea. But the other thing is that it makes the trade-offs that you always have to make and always were making anyway with your time impossible to ignore in a way that I think is probably very, very salutary. So that, as long as I'm not visualizing my work, as long as I'm not thinking about it in these terms, I can have some vague fantasy that today I was going to answer all my emails and work exhaustively on 3 or 4 different projects.
Yep.
I never can, so there's always a trade-off. It's not like the hard choice doesn't get made, it's just that it gets made unconsciously. And I don't I'm always going to neglect something, but the challenge is to choose what to neglect in a conscious way. And so if I'm taking a ticket from the waiting to be done column into the to-do column, I'm by definition at that point comparing it. I'm looking at all the other ones as well, and deciding that that while it would be really awesome to be able to do all of them in the next 10 minutes, that's not going to happen, and therefore, this is the one that needs some focus. And there's something about these times, certainly for those of us who are working and also doing something else, caring for a relative, parenting, in my case, whatever, that already is making those trade-offs incredibly vivid. I mean, it's just incredibly obvious now that an hour I spend working is an hour that my wife is not spending working, and an hour that she spends with our 3-year-old. This is just, the system is tightly coupled in this way, right? I mean, and that makes it more useful than ever, I think, with some kind of system like this, to sort of understand that that's what you're doing and that's what the cost is. And yeah.
So the funny thing about the term opportunity cost is that it is an economic term.
Right.
And if we don't limit our work in progress, then there is zero value to anything that we start doing, because we can just start doing things at random. So we can start doing 150 things right now if we want. We won't finish them, but there's zero cost to starting them.
Right.
When you limit your work in progress and you can only have 3 things at a time, then anything that you pull into doing is literally 33.33% of everything you could be doing right then. So what you're finding right now is that your household has a WIP limit of 2. Only 2 things can be happening at once, and one of them is always child.
Yes.
Okay, and then you guys get to pass off. So in the true sense of the Toyota Kanban, you are passing the work token. Sometimes you've got it and you're working. Sometimes your wife's got it and you're working. But at any given point in time, in the Berkman household, only one piece of work is happening at a time. If people could experience that lesson like explicitly more often, work at the office when all of this calms down would be much more humane than we find it typically.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it's always the case anyway, right? That yes, you're only focusing on this limited number of things.
We're always making choices, and then we make 55 choices at once, and then that starts to break down, and then other people come and make our choices for us.
Right, and then we beat ourselves up for not doing an amount of things that is really impossible for us to do in the first place. Yeah. Well, listen, I think out of respect for your time and the time of anyone who might have a million things to do, we should probably wrap up. Is there anything particularly relevant here that you wanted to say that I haven't asked you about?
Well, so I guess just the 2 things quickly is that Kanban is spelled Kanban.
I was going to ask you where people can find out more if that's what you want to
Yeah,
say. That's really
yeah.
useful.
And so what I was going to say to those two things are one is that at personalkanban.com, there's a wealth of resources there. But you'll also find that when you go there, there'll be a little thing that pops up in the corner saying that during this outbreak, we've reduced the cost of our online courses to at cost. And basically the reason is exactly as we've been discussing, is that right now, this is information that everybody needs. Everybody has a lot of stress, a lot of frustration, and a lot of desire, both for normalcy and to get things done. And that this is something that can help individuals and groups of people, do that stuff. So we want to make sure that that's available.
Great.
The other thing that I would just say is that everyone that listens to this needs to give themselves a break. This is right now is just patently weird. This is just plain weird.
Yeah.
It's weird, and it's weird in a threatening way. It's not like, oh wow, the sky is purple and it's pretty. It's like, no, this is weird, and this is like Marvel Comics weird. And so when you are working either in your house with kids, and maybe the kids, go berserk, or you're working with other people and their kids or their cats, or even they are going berserk, give everybody the space to berserk. And understand that work right now by default is going to happen, if not slower, at least in a very different way than it has done for all the other time. And I guess lastly, use this if you can as an opportunity to become closer to your teammates. Don't become an island. Don't silo yourself and just get your work done. Make sure you're working with other people and they see you and you see them.
All right. Wise words. Thank you very, very much indeed, Jim. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. This was fun.